Hello and welcome to an all-new episode of Anime Brain Freeze. We are your wandering hosts.
I am John.
And I'm CC, and when there's just too much cool anime to watch, we got you covered. We are back in the podcast seats, while otherwise just like you out there, biding our time until this weird part of the year comes to a close, hopefully sooner rather than later. Although, social distancing comes easy to you and me, John, because we live on two different continents.
Yeah, 3, 4, 5,000 miles, no big deal.
Yeah, easy. We don't even need masks. It's fantastic. Anyway, today we will kick off the review session by talking about a group of investigators who track down serial killers by diving into a construct of their mind in the series ID Invaded. And after that, we will wrap things up by going on a fantastical journey with a little human girl and her big golem dad in Somali and the Forest Spirit. Very different shows. Maybe one of them will be of interest to you, so don't pause the pod. We'll be right back. Kura, a politically independent, secretive police organization, is dedicated to investigating the most complicated homicide cases. Aiding them in their difficult task is the Mizuhanome system, a highly experimental device that enables certain investigators to dive into a virtual reality constructed from remnant particles of the culprit's desire to kill. But to use the Mizuhanome, the investigator needs to have killed someone already as well. Thus, the team at Kura employs the former renowned detective turned serial killer Akihito Narihisago, who takes on the guise of the brilliant detective Sakaido and supplies the field investigation team with all the clues he can find in the virtual mindspace of the pursued murderers. But can Narihisago outrun time without losing himself any further? And is he ready to face the harsh hidden truths that lurk inside the virtual well of his own mind? So, ID Invaded is an original anime TV series that ran for 13 episodes this winter season. There is also a manga adaptation that started in October last year, so earlier than the actual anime, but it's still running while the anime has wrapped up. So I assume the anime story came first, and this is just the manga version of that. I mean, that sometimes happens. I wonder if there is more story in the manga that, after what story was covered in the anime. It would be interesting to find that out, but yeah, that's the current status on this project, I guess. And the anime was produced by, I don't know if it's called NAZ or NAZ, don't remember, but they also did the animation production on Engelma, or a show I reviewed, but also Dramatical Murder, Hamatora, which I think had a banger OP, if I remember correctly. Need to look that up again. My Sister, My Writer, Infinite Dendrogram, and other stuff.
I think I seem to recall from pretty good, reliable sources that My Sister, My Writer was some trash.
Not only trash, but problematic in certain ways too.
The spirit of Ori Emo lives on.
Oh yeah. Sadly. Please kill it.
What is dead can never die.
Oh yeah. All men must die, but sadly, apparently shitty anime live on forever. Anyway, so the animation in ID Invaded is serviceable, but not super great. There's some good background art and neat surreal imagery in the virtual world, sometimes like looking straight like something out of a Salvatore Dali painting. Some decent CG and several good action shots here and there, but due to it being a procedural, it's mostly a lot of talking heads. And these heads ain't pretty. The character design in this show is very weird in my opinion and feels very off-model, even though it looks like this all the time. Like these weird slanted eyes, weird head shapes and chins. It just looks off.
There's a lot of really, I think a good word is angular designs.
Yeah, weird angular designs. Like someone didn't take the right measurements or something. It's like Did you just fucking move the scale somehow, somewhere in the wrong direction?
No, don't worry about it. It's fine.
No, it reminds me of some of the worst off-model scenes in Golden Kamuy, only without the charm that series has. It was very distracting sometimes. I mean, it looks fine on other characters. I think, what's the field investigator, female field investigator, Hondo Machi?
Yeah, Hondo Machi.
Yeah, she looks fine mostly. Just most of the male characters look weird, and some of the other female characters as well. And the main character too. It's just really, I don't know. And the weird thing is the character designs were done by Atsushi Itagaki, who also did the character designs for small stuff like Fate Stay Night, Heaven's Feel, Fate Zero, The Devil is a Part-Timer, all shows with really good, sharp character designs. So I don't know what happened here.
I mean, I don't know what the original character designs, like, from like the design sheets and documents look like, but sometimes you just gotta do the best with what you have.
Yeah, maybe some of the staff at HEAD weren't able to like convert his character designs properly to animation.
He was also the chief animation director. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
It is weird. I don't know what happened here, but it looks strange. And like I said, is sometimes very distracting. The OP is also very lazy and just reappropriate scenes from the first episode of the show and put some abstract filters and shapes over them. It's kind of like, okay, why even bother? Just do a cold open or something if you just, if you don't want to put any fucking effort into it.
Yeah, it's not a fully clip show intro. Those are the ones that I'm really like about.
Yeah.
But
at least there's some effect stuff in there.
Sometimes you can do that well. Like there are some shows, like I remember in particular, and this is gonna be a fucking hell of a pull, but I remember the first few episodes of Chrono Crusade.
Holy shit. Blast from the past, that awfully misspelled. Don't you mean Chrono Crusade? Chrono.
Either way, the first like 4 episodes, I think, they had one intro sequence, and like they would have brief flashes toward the end of like clips that are upcoming from the episode. And like, yeah, that's cool. That's a neat way to do it. But when your intro is a lot more clips than not, it sort of leaves a lot to be desired.
One Piece has been doing something like that, where it just has most of it is a normal OP with lots of cool animation and action and everything, but in the middle there's like a small episode preview spliced in between. And I like that kind of stuff. I think that's cool. It's like gives you a small idea about what's coming up and what will be cool, and the rest is just fucking eye candy. And yeah, I mean, stuff like that is great, but this just felt like, we had to do an OP. Here you go.
Yeah, I mean, there's fun ways to, do your intros and your endings. Like in particular, this is gonna be another weird pull, but I remember in the ending sequence for Hakata Tonkotsu Ramens, there's a part where not all of the music drops out, but you're just left with a little bit of the percussion and some of the instrumentation. And instead of an episode preview, you get characters saying lines from the next episode, and it's like, oh, okay, that's a neat, stylish way to do that.
Sure, why not? Yeah, there are some creative ways to do this, and the ED for this is great. There's some really neat artwork in there. And so
get another banger from Miyavi.
Yeah, we'll get to that later too as well. But yeah, so that's fine. But the OP just stuck out to me as something. Why bother? Anyway,
yeah.
So the series is directed by Aoki, who directed 2 shows I loved and one I hated. The former being Fate Zero and Recreators, the latter being Outlaw Zero.
You didn't watch all of Aldnoah Zero.
No, I watched all of it.
Oh, did you?
I did.
You did.
I finished that show.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, I did too. I don't know why I did.
Me neither. I'm a glutton for punishment, I guess. But yeah, anyway, he also did a bunch of storyboard stuff, like for the Fate spin-off Lord El Malloy, for example, which we recently reviewed, and several episode director gigs. But the first 3 shows I named definitely stick out, and the first 2 of those were the reason I want to check out this show, despite its sometimes weird character designs. Responsible for the script and series composition is Otaro Maijo, who hasn't done much else. He wrote the story for the manga Bjork Trinity and Spotless Love, and wrote the script for the Dragon Dentist specials, and he also worked on a part of the Japan Anime Expo original net animation from whatever year as a storyboard artist and episode director. And yeah, we'll get to how his writing worked out in this show momentarily. But before that, I want to highlight the music in the show, which I really liked, because it has a lot of catchy and sometimes emotional vocal tracks. The problem is I don't know who was mostly responsible for it. Like, ANN lists Kisuke Koizumi as the music director, but aside from this, he has only been responsible for sound direction so far. And Wikipedia says the music is by U/As. I don't know if that is a pseudonym. Does it mean the person is unknown? Is a collection of artists? I have no fucking idea. So yeah, this is a mystery this detective couldn't solve.
Didn't you find something a while back about it being like these 2 composers working together?
I think that was a different show.
I'm
not sure. But currently, I just assume by looking at the soundtrack listing, it's just a bunch of different artists contributing tracks. Among them, Miyavi, as you mentioned before, who also did the ED, Soundbreakers, Kazuya Nagami, and Hiroshi Suinami, to name a few. But yeah, anyway, whoever was responsible mainly for this, great job. The soundtrack was definitely a highlight of the show. I enjoyed it very much. There are a lot of great tracks in there that really emphasize the better moments of the show. Aside from that, ID Invaded is a very mixed bag, in my opinion. Like I said, I was interested in the show because of Aoki being at the helm, and I'm a sucker for procedurals, especially with a sci-fi edge. And I definitely got that. This is a pretty obvious mix of 2 Hollywood movies I can recall, which are The Cell and Minority Report. It's downright ripping them off in certain aspects. Especially one of the final plot device reveals is taken straight from Minority Report.
Is it really? I've never actually seen the movie.
Yeah, it's put in the beginning there, and here it's kind of like one of the final reveals in terms of the identity of one of the characters. But I was fine with that. Like, I don't mind, taking inspiration, which is, kind of a charitable way to describe this, but taking inspiration from other works that I like. So yeah, sure, why not? The problem is I'm not really happy with the execution on the story side of things, and I don't think I like this show that much. I don't hate it, but I came away from it with kind of a feeling.
Yeah,
John, how did you feel?
That's honestly how I felt too. Like, I was like, this show's all right. I guess it had dope ass music, but yeah, when we started diving into Narisago's past, that made me care about him.
Oh yeah,
and
we'll get to that.
Really
but yeah,
much, and not really much else though.
Exactly. So on the basic level, this story, like I mentioned in the summary, is about a group of investigators who work with this machine that creates virtual constructs of a killer's unconsciousness. And these constructs are called ID wells. And by diving basically through this kind of dream machine virtual reality interface, whatever, they try to determine the identity of the killer and the next possible victim. And they have to send the consciousness of a real person, a pilot, that is, in this case, also named the Brilliant Detective, into this VR world to solve a murder puzzle while they investigate on the outside. So we have the Brilliant Detective in the well, the investigative team analyzing the data that he gains from the killer's mind construct, and the field team that tries to actually catch the killer, sometimes with the help of the wider police force. And They construct the killer's unconsciousness by using some sci-fi gizmo called Wakumusubi, which looks like the ghost detection thingy from Ghostbusters, to collect like these so-called cognition particles left behind by the killers at crime scenes.
Of course, all of these devices are named after Japanese mythological stuff.
Yeah, sure, as usual. That's kind of par for the course, but I wasn't aware of that, so thank you. Although they explain some of that in the show, I think. And as you can probably already tell, the show has a lot of technobabble, but in my opinion, that was one of the more bearable aspects of the show. It doesn't get too overbearing in that regard. I think there are shows that are worse there. They handle that worse. It's a bit much in the beginning, maybe, to get you acquainted with all the terms, but then it doesn't really dwell on that too much. And once you're familiar with all the devices and how the world, this VR world works, it's pretty fine. So, like John already mentioned or alluded to, the most interesting character in the show is the main brilliant detective, whose name is Akihiko Narihisago, and in the virtual world he's called Sakaido. His code name that's kind of, I assume, is one of the safety devices that are put in there, and I'll get to that. And there are other people that also, play the role of brilliant detective later on in the show, and they all have different names and a different appearance in the virtual world than in the real world. And that's probably one of the most interesting parts in the show. Just like the whole idea of that different persona investigating the stuff in the virtual world. And again, the most interesting of those selection of characters, which are pretty much 3, is Narihisago, who is actually a convict. Because, well, there's tragedy in his background, and I think I can give that away because they do that in the 2nd or 3rd episode as well. So his daughter got killed by a serial killer called the Challenger, and shortly after that his wife committed suicide, so good times all around. And since then he has been kinda on this revenge penance mission, and he has used the skills and knowledge he gained in the ID well while, pursuing the killers and learning about their unconsciousness and stuff, to actually kill those murderers, those serial killers, after they have been apprehended and put basically in the same cell block as he is. He talks to them and takes apart their mind space, confronts them with their unconscious thoughts and their most inner self, which drives them to suicide. And that is a really dark, fucked up thing in this show, but it's also one of the most interesting things. And for that character and how it's handled, it's really, really riveting to see. But let's get back to how this whole brilliant detective thing and investigation in the VR world works again. Every time he dives into this new world, there is a girl named Kairu there that is murdered, and in a different way. And by solving her murder, he finds clues that relate to the real killer in the real world. Even though the VR world doesn't have to necessarily be, on the surface, something that is super related to the killer. It's weird, it's surreal, but after a while you get the hang of it, and you understand how these worlds are constructed from the killer's unconsciousness, and how finding clues and everything works in this world. And that's one of the more interesting aspects in the show, like on a concept basis alone. And he dives into this world, sees Karu, and begins investigating a murder. She's basically the avatar for the victims in the real world, kinda. Big catch: during a dive, Sakaido doesn't retain any of his real self's memories. He basically has to start every investigation from 0% and can't draw from past knowledge and conclusions, really, which is a big handicap, which is why you also need a very capable detective. And this is basically like a live, die, repeat scenario where he has to try to find the solution to this puzzle by trial and error method, and dying a lot in these virtual constructs. And Kairu is also the trigger to give him at least some of his basic memories back, like his nickname and that he is in this world to solve her murder. And you can't dive into your own ID well, which is a very important aspect, which they bring up at the beginning of the show, because that would mean the consciousness would become your consciousness would become aware of your unconsciousness, which would mean you would completely lose yourself in your own mind and couldn't return, and would just basically just fucking slip into a comatose state. Because to protect the unconsciousness, the ID well would become infinite and trap the pilot / brilliant detective inside, or any human that tries to dive into their own consciousness. And that's why he loses his memories when he's diving into the mines. It's a safety measure by the system, so that he doesn't get confronted with his own unconsciousness. I thought all of this, just from a basic concept alone and how it was set up and how all of this works, was kind of a very interesting idea. How did you feel about it, John?
I mean, I feel like after getting over the hump of how bizarre and minority reportish, psychopathish, because let's not lie to ourselves, it's very psychopathish.
Yes.
It was after they established how the Idwell worked and all of that, I was sort of on board with it. Like, oh, okay, I'm seeing how things in this world sort of slot into place, and how they sort of give you this expectation of how these sort of mental investigations work. And I thought, that much was at least pretty interesting. I don't know if it's enough to really draw a lot of people in, because let's not lie to ourselves, it's more than a little convoluted.
Yeah, sure. And, it's pretty abstract in a way, and there's a lot of suspense of disbelief when it comes to drawing certain conclusions from certain things. But it's still kind of interesting to look at if you have a knack for, investigation plots, like trying to find certain clues through certain things and then getting reveals about the identity of a person and stuff like that. And, it's a different take on it, and I liked it. Also, is it really called Idwell? I thought it was Idwell.
I assumed it was supposed to be id, because, the id is part of your consciousness. That's what I was running with. I think they were trying to do some dumb, punny shit, too, because in Japanese... Yeah, id and well are both pronounced the same way in Japanese.
Yeah, right. It's Ido, right? And that's also well. Okay, yeah. That was the pun. Okay, I remember now. Let's just call it the well, so to fucking circumvent that. Anyway, so yeah, like I said, now what he has been convicted for and what his method is, Narihisago's method is that after the killers are caught, like I said, he confronts them with what he has seen and deduced from his visit to their well. And he confronts their consciousness with their unconsciousness and drives them to commit suicide. On the one hand, you feel a sense of gratification when he does that, since those people tend to be monsters. But on the other hand, it's super creepy.
It's super fucked up.
And monstrous for him to do this as well. And Kenjiro Tsuda, again, turns out to be perfect for that role, because when he leads into the dialogue with an already apprehended serial bomber in episode 3 and manipulates him to kill himself just because that guy made the mistake of bringing up his dead daughter, he's creepy as fuck. Tsuda has just the right voice for this kind of stuff. I don't know. It's perfect casting in my opinion. I really liked it.
I mean, I will always, anytime I see his name on the cast, I'm like, I guess I'm going to check this out. So, I like, he has proven himself to be have a wide range. So, that's coming from my first time hearing him as, I always got to bring it up, as Seto Kaiba. So,
yeah, definitely. And he's a really interesting character and probably the most faceted one. There's later a big part in the last third of the series revolves about him coming to terms with his past, with what he did, with what happened to his family and everything. And like you said, that's just the most interesting, one could say the only really interesting aspect of the show, or consistently interesting aspect. Every time we turn towards the stuff about Narihisago, it gets interesting. It becomes engaging. You want to know more. You want to learn everything there is to learn. Yeah, so that's good stuff. And that also involves him diving into a lot of wells. And those, on the visual side of things, are also kind of interesting because they tend to be really abstract and out there sometimes. And, like I said, it's really weird and fucked up because Sakaido gets killed in them multiple times, or Narihisago. There are many weird objects that are kind of linked to the killers in real life. It's interesting to see him investigate that stuff. And yeah, you would think to be more important character than he actually turns out to be is Funetaro Momoki, who is a former colleague of Narihisago and is the current head of the investigation team. And he also still considers Narihisago a person, just a weak one for what he did, and they're not really friends anymore or anything, but they're still kind of colleagues. So there could have been an interesting dynamic between them, and they tried to do some stuff with that, but in my opinion, not enough. They could really have done something with the relationship between those two characters, like that detective fallen from grace, but because of a very personal reason. And, a former colleague who's still on the very straight side of the law, and then those two just clashing heads, having discussions about this kind of stuff. And they do, like I said, they do some of that in the beginning, but there's not much else really there. And Momoki's also really only partly relevant to the plot in certain aspects. Becomes kind of a fall guy later, I think, and it's not really that interesting what they do with him, which was kind of a shame, because I saw potential in that character, and especially when it comes to his relation to Narihisago, and they didn't do enough with that, in my opinion.
They tried to give him a moment toward the end of the series, and it was kind of like, all right, but it didn't really save how little he had to do the rest of the show.
Yeah. And that's kind of a bummer.
Yeah. Now I'm important for an episode and a half.
Yeah. Aside from Narihisago, there's one other character. Well, two maybe. I don't want to talk about the last one too much because that's kind of a spoiler in regards to how he becomes a more important character later on. But the second one is Hondomachi, which is this young startup woman who becomes a part of the field investigation team together with her older brash partner Matsuoka. And she gets immediately at the end of the first episode, she gets captured by a serial killer, and something really really awful happens to her, but she recovers from that and then is prominently featured and also pretty relevant to at least how the story develops in a certain way later on. But as a character, again, they don't do enough with her. She's important in terms of the main investigation, the main mystery of the show, which we'll get to. But her character, aside from, she did that thing in the second episode, and now what does that mean for her character and how she behaves and everything, and how does that relate to the broader investigation? They don't really, there's never any depth, not even remotely any depth like there is for Narihisago's character. We don't really learn much about her backstory or anything, and that also really, that's a problem that relates to the entirety of the rest of the cast in this show. Aside from Narihisago, Hondomachi, maybe Matsuoka, maybe Momoki, and one other character again, which I won't mention now, the other investigators have no background and barely any distinctive personalities. They are just talking heads spouting exposition dumps. Just there's nothing to these characters. Nothing. I can't remember their names.
The only other member of the Kura I can really identify was Matsuoka, because he and Hondomachi were partners and they were together, in a few episodes, and it's okay, he's neat, and then he gets sidelined. Yeah. Everyone gets sidelined.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The problem is if they would be only in the beginning, hey, this is the setup, blah, but now we focus on Narahisogo and Hondomachi, that would be fine. The problem is in every episode there are scenes where the focus for some reason is on the rest of the investigation team, but we learn nothing about them. The only thing they do, the only thing they're here for is to tell us what other characters, like, explain the story to us. Like, to tell us, okay, this is what happens in the plot currently. Thank you very much. And this is what's gonna happen next. But we learn nothing about these characters. We don't know where they come from. We don't know what they do outside of this job. We don't know what they think, really. It's just, they're just these kind of blank slates in a way that are only just these weird canvases for the plot details. And that didn't work for me. Like, not at all. I was just like, who are these characters? And like I said, they barely have any personalities. Yeah, there is more, I don't know, spunky kid. There's more strict kid guy. There is more strict lady. And they somehow know each other. But we don't know what they think about each other. We don't know how they came to this fucking job. What their life is outside of this, like I mentioned. We learn nothing interesting about them. And that's a bummer, especially considering how much time they have in this show. And like you said, the only other interesting character was Matsuoka. And then, in the beginning, and he has some interesting discussions with Hondomachi and stuff like that. And he has an attitude, and you kind of feel like he's this veteran field investigator who has seen shit. And I was like, hey, this is an interesting character. And then he gets sidelined, like you said. And in the beginning, there's interesting discussion between Momoki and Narahisogo. And then he gets sidelined. It's like, hey, instead of throwing away these potentially interesting characters, just maybe concentrate on them and develop them. Instead of showing us characters you don't intend to do anything with at all. And fucking have them tell us shit. What is this?
Nah.
I did not understand the writing approach to any of these characters at all. Why even put them in there then? So this was a weird thing. And the other problematic thing in this is the main plot, I guess. The main mystery, the main riddle, the main puzzle they have to solve. Basically, there's a link. Early on, it's already hinted at that there's a link between all the killers they're pursuing. And it's this character called John Walker, who for some reason appears in the minds of kind of all the killers. And it's like this weird dude with a walking stick and a top hat, and you can't really see his face. And like I said, he has appeared in the minds of all the serial killers. So they're like, hey, somehow they're all connected. Maybe John Walker is responsible for these serial killers. Maybe he created them in a way. And that in itself, as a concept, is cool. You're immediately interested, oh, who is this guy? What did he do to these people so they became serial killers? What is he after? The problem is, the identity of John Walker is so damn fucking obvious that it makes the central mystery a lot less interesting. I mean, the main character is called a brilliant detective, and he can figure out the identity of the bad guy, even though that bad guy has the same haircut and hair color as the guy who he is in the real world. Come the fuck on! That is not a good mystery. And that also means the investigation into his identity is kinda boring. Especially when characters rattle off long expositional monologues to get to the bottom of something the viewer has already deduced in the first fucking episode. I was like, I looked at John Walker and it's like, okay, that hair, oh, it's that guy. Okay, then there will be a reveal in a couple of episodes, and that reveal happens in the second to last episode. And it's like, what? The show's like it's this super giant plot reveal. Like, yeah, of course it's that guy. It was so fucking obvious. Are you kidding me? Like, what the fuck? Brilliant detective, my ass. Holy shit.
You gotta work your way up to it, though. Come on, man. It's not a mystery. It's not a mystery otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Also, his motive is really stupid. Like, he's a jackass with a god complex and a fetish for the number 7? Like, fucking what? This is really... This was the worst part of the show. Aside from, doing nothing with the other characters, who are basically just used to tell us stuff about the investigation into this John Walker case that we have already deduced in a way, or decided that it's not relevant because we already know more than these characters know. Because it's so damn fucking obvious. And that's not how you do a good procedural. That's not how you do a good mystery show. It's like, you can't make it so fucking obvious. Just why would you even do that? Just fucking making a Black Shadow or something. Why would you make it so fucking obvious who that character is in real life? I don't understand that. That's ridiculous to me. Holy shit. I don't understand. It boggles the mind. In the beginning, the show is kind of interesting because it's all the setup, and we get to learn how these how the tools work, how the investigation stuff works. And in the last third, it's interesting because shit gets super freaky, kind of like in the last 1 or 2 episodes. Like there's wells within wells, entering someone's dreams. Like this is where the show becomes more interesting again, because it's becoming more weird again and crazy and kind of fun, stupid in a way, but also funny and fun and a bit more action heavy and stuff like that. So yeah, that's fine with me. The problem is all the stuff in the middle, where it's like, you know, there's some characters introduced, some more relevant, others are not. But the show is constantly slowly building towards this big reveal, which with this central investigation that you have already revealed to yourself. You're just waiting for them to tell you, okay, why did that character do it? What is its motive? But they keep that like for the very last episodes. It's a very stupid motive. And it's like, aside from that, all the characters are slowly trying to find out who this character is and do not much else. And you already know. So all that stuff is incredibly superfluous, and it just feels just like a giant waste of time. And the only interesting stuff in the middle is the stuff with Narihisago and his past. And when they dive into his, you know, mind space and, you know, his background and everything. Like, forcing the other serial killers into suicide and working as the brilliant detective is a form of penance and punishment for himself. And he enters these worlds again and again in the hope of one day being able to save the placeholder victim Kairu, because he couldn't save his real daughter. A goal which he will never really be able to achieve. And that there is such an inherent sadness to that, and makes that character so tragic and kind of relatable in a way, that all these moments where the focus is on that story are really good and really strong. Add to that some great musical tracks in certain key moments, and you got a killer show. The problem is all the other stuff. And I feel like they should have focused more on Narihisago's story. Maybe give, you know, Momoki some more development, some Matsuoka, and try to focus on them, give Hondomachi an interesting background, and try to focus on these 4 characters kind of clashing with each other, like the dynamic between Hondomachi and Matsuoka, make that one of the main focuses, and the dynamic between Narihisago and Momoki, make that the main focus, and cut all the other characters out, in a way, or just have them just be on the sidelines sometimes. But don't make the central mystery that central, or make it more interesting. And they didn't do that. And that's why a lot of this shit in this show doesn't work, and was honestly disappointing. John, what was your takeaway from all this?
Yeah, I mean, you basically hit the nail on the head 100%. I mean, in spite of all of that, though, I don't think I hate this show.
I don't hate it.
I don't think in 10 years I'll look back on this show and be like, yeah, all right, maybe I'll rewatch it. I mean, I might go and listen to Samurai 45 again, because that is a fire track.
Oh, yeah.
But this show just kind of fell into being ultimately really not much of anything outside of Narihisago's backstory.
Yeah.
Like, everything else is ultimately forgettable or uninteresting, because, you know, we needed the 8 extra characters in Kuda to help fill out everyone up. Jesus Christ, man. Like, you're right. You're absolutely right. Could have cut like 3/4 of the cast. And you don't need a cast that's a mile long. You could just have, the characters you need and not all these other characters who don't really matter.
You can have a mile-long cast if you do something with most of them and actually try to develop these characters. Like My Hero Academia has a giant cast, but they do a lot with a lot of characters. This show didn't. And this show is too short to do something with that many characters.
Maybe if it was a 2-core show, they could have made it work out. But even then, with the central mystery, if they changed it up so it wasn't like, oh, it's you. We knew it was you all along.
Yeah.
But I don't know. They didn't even try to explain away like, oh, he was somehow able to obfuscate his cognition particles so the Mizuhano Can we talk about how they were like, hey, you know what's cool? Using these Japanese mythological figures for these things, like even calling it Mizuhano Man Wakamusubi, even if you speak native Japanese, don't you think that's like a lot to expect people to remember? Like, what were what were they called in Psychopaths? The Dominators. Yeah. Boom, easy. No, we have Mizuhanome, which we're gonna have a little history lesson. Or as much of a history lesson as you can with mythology. Don't at me about whether history and mythology are the same. Mizuhanome was a child of Izanami, which is, I believe, if I'm right, one of the creation gods of the world in Japan, Izanami and Izanagi.
Comes up frequently also in Naruto.
Yes.
Because Naruto is full of fucking mythology. It puts everything in there. From Princess Kaguya to fucking Amaterasu, everything is in Naruto.
Fucking Naruto.
Yeah.
So Mizuhanome was one of the children of Izanami, who was born during her death throes after being burnt by after the birth of Kagutsuchi. Mm-hmm. And as it turns out, Mizuhanome is the sister of Wakamusubi.
Ah.
So yes, thematically it makes sense that the systems tie into one another, but it's like you couldn't have chosen a more succinct and sensible nomenclature. You had to go with Mizuhanome and Wakamusubi. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you. I confused the two so much as they were going along. It took me a while. It took me a while to be like, oh, okay, so the Wakamusubi is the not dominator.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's weird. I mean, you can, of course, give them
symbolic names.
These symbolic names, right? Especially, if you're Japanese and you know your way around Japanese mythology or Japanese history, you maybe like, oh yeah, I remember that. This is a neat idea or link to that for some reason. But it's like, why bother? It's not like it adds anything to the story or or to how these things work. Like, if there was actually some mythological component to all this, that would be kind of interesting. Yeah, it's not. It's like, okay, just fucking call it the computer and the fucking detector, and then we're done with that shit. Okay, whatever. It's weird, you're right.
That's still something I got a little more hung up on than I probably should have, but just the same.
Yeah, but
sorry, Japan.
Probably because the show didn't have much else to offer. That's...
Yeah.
If your mind was busy with other stuff, you probably wouldn't have dwelled on that so much. So there you go. I think that's what it comes down to. Like, every time the show is giving the spotlight to the rest of the investigation team and to the central quote-unquote mystery, it felt like it's treading water. And I wish they would have focused on something else. It's a bummer, because there was the potential for a really cool show in here, which would have been interesting all the way through. And the rating of that show is actually kind of high. If I look at ANN, if I look at Live Chart, most people like the show. And I don't, like you said, I also don't hate that show. It's one of those shows where I see wasted potential at every fucking corner. And some of the decisions that were made are just fucking mind-boggling to me. Why focus on a central mystery that is so fucking obvious that you just fucking solve most of it in the first episode? And why spend so much time on solving that mystery then? So why? Why not focus on your characters? Why not focus on the characters that are inherently interesting and just cut out everyone else that is not doing anything anyway? Just, if you need drones that spout exposition, just put random lab technician 1 in there who does all the exposition dumps, and that's it. You have one character for that who always does that. That's fine. Don't fucking put 5 or 6 characters in there who just fucking split it up between each other and have nothing else to offer. What the hell? I don't... Yeah, I guess if an Aoki show turns out good is heavily dependent on the writer after all. Like, Recreators was a co-project with Rei Hiroe, who also wrote one of my all-time favorites, Black Lagoon. So no surprise there. And Phase Zero was based on a light novel written by Gen Urobuchi. It was also written Madoka, the first season, and the movie for a Psychopath, Kamen Rider Gaim, Thunderbolt Fantasy, which I still need to check out. But, you know, which all were fantastic shows with well-written stories and characters. And while he also wrote the first 3 episodes of Outlaw Zero, which were still good, after that he handed the reins over to Katsuhiko Takayama, who went on to then righteously shit the bed in the story department. So yeah, ID Invaded is not a total failure like Outlaw Zero turned out to be, but Nari Hisago's story aside, it's also not really good either. That's pretty much it. Depending on the country you live in, it's streamed on Funimation, Hulu, Netflix, or Wakanim, and some other services. I probably wouldn't check out a second season, because, like I said, the central mystery is solved. And aside from some potentially neat case of the week stuff, there's not really much room to continue the story, aside from turning some of the characters into actual characters, not just talking exposition dispensers. Yeah, check it out if you're into procedurals. If not, there's not much here for you. The central mystery is laughably predictable. There's 1, maybe 2 good characters and some good music. But aside from that, the show has not a lot to offer, sadly, because the first couple of episodes were pretty promising. But hey, they can't all be winners. There are definitely worse shows out there, but there are also a bunch of much better ones available. So maybe check those out instead, even if you just want to kill some time.
Well, the other show on the docket for today is Somali in the Forest Spirit. It's a show that I think is a little more, slightly more mellowed out in comparison.
Oh, yeah. And better.
Yes. So, Somali in the Forest Spirit. The world is ruled by spirits, goblins, and all manner of strange creatures. The species known as humanity once populated this world as well, but upon encountering monster kind, humans grew fearful and lashed out. Now human beings are persecuted to the very point of extinction, and to most monsters are nothing but a distant memory. In a lonely forest, a golem resided as its guardian spirit. Its purpose was to protect the forest and ensure its continued survival, though without interfering with the individual cycles of nature. One day that golem came across a child in rags and chains, a child that lacked claws, horns, or fangs. Upon seeing the golem, the human child uttered a single word, "Dad." This is a record of the pair, one a member of a ruined race, the other a watchman of the forest. It tells of their travels together and of the bond between father and daughter. So, Somali and the Forest Spirit originally started as a manga in August of 2015 and is still running. It was authored by one Yako Gudeishi. I think I said that right. And the show was produced at our friends Satellite.
Yay!
And we have talked about them before during talks about Macross Delta. We haven't talked about Macross Frontier, but they also produce that as well. They produced Hakata Tonkotsu Ramens, which I talked about at one point. They also produced this one other little show. Maybe you've heard of it. I think we talked about it once or twice. Called Symphogear.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Yes.
It's only one of our favorite franchises ever.
I mean, that's no big deal.
Yeah.
So show was directed by Kenji Yasuda, who worked on a few of the aforementioned shows, and some other stuff like Boogie Pop Phantom, that is to say the original 2001, I think it was, show, not the newer one that aired, was it last year or the year before? Did some work on Full Metal Alchemist and Heat Guy J, which takes me back just thinking about that show because, man, that's another pull. I don't know if you remember that one about
I do. I didn't see much of Heat Guy J, but it was heavily promoted and got the character designs from the same guy who did Escaflowne, I think.
Yeah.
Which was like this big thing.
Yeah, I just remember it being about basically android cop.
Yeah, with steampunk.
Yeah, a little bit of that in there. But yeah, the show in direct comparison to the one we talked about before, I feel like it's a lot more colorful and imaginative and just much. It's almost like this dreamscape type show where it's just nature running wild where it can, and then these like small settlements of monsters and like humanoids but not humans that live in them, and it's all about this little girl Somali and the forest golem that they travel together trying to find the remnants of what they can find of humanity, because we're introduced pretty early on to the fact that this golem runs on a cycle, and the cycles are, I believe it was 1,000 years.
Yes.
And this golem is coming up on the end of that. We're not really filled in at first as to how much longer it is, but
so at the point we meet him, or at the point where he has that talk with one of the characters they meet, with Shizuno, he is 998 years and about 250 days old, so his life will end in 1 year and 112 days from the start of the journey.
Yeah, I mean, so that detail sort of gets slipped in later on, but yeah, the golem's aim is to help Somali find, not necessarily her parents, but like a human tribe that can take her in and take care of her, because he doesn't have much time left.
And he knows if she is left on her own, she will probably either die because she can't fucking find food herself or take care of herself, but also because everything in this world, if they find out that she's human, will try to kill her, eat her even. Because this is how this works for several reasons.
Yeah. Did you know that one of the themes of this show is racism?
I kind of figured it out after like in the second episode or something, where they show like the humans interacting with the monsters, calling them grotesques.
Yeah.
And the monsters not understanding what's happening, being totally friendly in the beginning, and then after the humans start a fucking war over the monsters they fear, even though they didn't do anything to them, the monsters kill them, hunt them down and kill them all because the humans are in over their fucking head. No, John, I didn't figure out this was about xenophobia and racism.
Okay, I just wanted to point that out to you.
I'm making fun, like this bothered me or anything, but this is not where, like in ID Invaded, where it's like this thing that is super obfuscated, and it's like, oh my god, what is really behind all of this? And then you figure it out immediately, and they make this big deal at the end of the show out of it. No, it's pretty clear that one of the big themes in the show from the get-go is xenophobia and racism. And the show deals in very interesting and varied ways with that subject matter, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there are no uncertain terms with this, the central theming of this show is about. You could also say that it's also about, survival and, another big core theme
Yeah.
is, family.
Yeah, family, survival, dad and daughter, becoming a father, and learning to care for a child, becoming aware of your emotions, and it's also a story about prejudice and forgiveness. There's a lot of it, a lot of stuff, a lot of things to chew on in this story, and I think each of them is given sufficient time, to simmer a bit in the back of your head, and to to give you your own thoughts about it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a very pretty show because the locales are all very nicely detailed, and you get a really good idea of these what the creatures are like in these different settlements. Some of them are like the first one. I think the first one they come across is more like a small town sort of thing, and then they come across one that's like this large area that's sort of like in a canyon sort of deal.
Yeah, there's one in a hollowed out volcano.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
pretty cool. Yeah. And also I thought, just as a side note, I also loved the soundtrack of this show. I think it was great. It was very RPG-ish, which kind of feels like it belongs in this kind of fantasy-ish, in this kind of fantasy, in this kind of rich fantasy world. Like it's very, very soothing at times. I mean, it gets, when there is one of those few action moments, it also gets, riveting, more fast paced and stuff like that. But mostly it's like this really soothing and comforting, RPG soundtrack that I really liked. I don't know, did you feel about the music?
I mean, yeah, I guess I get a little bit of that vibe from it, which is interesting because I think the one big RPG that Ryo Yoshimata worked on was Persona 2 Innocent Sin.
Kind of a different feel to it.
Yeah.
That game has.
But he's also worked on other shows like After the Rain, which I believe we talked about at one point.
It's also more of a feel-good show, I think, so that works.
Yeah, so, he can definitely channel into that easier listening, laid back vibe pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier one of the characters, Shizuno. That is one of half of a pair that Somali and this Golem meet on the first leg of their journey, Shizuno and Yabashira, and they are a pair of Oni. And they have this shack in the woods where they try to sell or produce, medicines and stuff like that. And
they're two different Oni, which was also interesting. That Yabashira is like a normal Oni, and Shizuno is a dwarf Oni, which are smarter than normal Oni, but don't really grow beyond child size. And that was just a neat, interesting, just side bit. Which there are a lot of those little tidbits in the show. Like there's a lot of neat world building here and there, like explaining certain fauna or flora and the origins of towns and everything, and the different aspects of the different monster races and all that stuff, which I really liked. But yeah, back to those two characters.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. They go into decent detail about the different aspects of the flora and the fauna and the way what things grow where, what they can be used for, where they can be found. It's a very in tune with nature story, which you're probably saying duh at this point.
And also it also makes this world that we are not really familiar with more of an additional character, something that feels like palpable and that feels like it's got a life of its own and is real in a way. I think the show does a really good job at establishing its world as a really important part of the show and of the characters that live in it.
Yeah, it feels like, these, the characters on the periphery have explored it. They've learned things about it. They're sharing knowledge with Somali and the Golem, and that, helps broaden their horizons and helps, help them prepare for when they need to travel along the different legs of their journey.
And even if it's just to cook some, food, some recipe for a cake or something or stuff like that, or medicine. And yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, they learn how to craft some medicine from Shizuno and Yabashira. And they sort of have their suspicions about what Somali is. And the Golem, tells them that while Somali is sleeping, and they're like, they sort of come to an understanding, like, yeah, I think we sort of figured that out, sort of thing. But unlike a lot of things that happen later on, which I think we'll talk about a little bit, without trying not to go into too much spoilers, because the story does go places and it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. There's some smaller character stories here and there because they meet a lot of different characters during their journey. But there's also a big thing kind of happening at the end that is related to our two main characters and everything and their relationship. And, there's this underlying arc where it's like, hey, the Golem will die sometime, and he's kind of, he's already starting to fall apart, like parts of his body are breaking off. And, you get the feeling, okay, this story is probably not gonna have a happy ending. I don't know if I'm ready for this, because the characters are already growing on me, and I like them very much. And, that happens, and he doesn't tell Somali that is his condition, because he doesn't want her to be sad, because he cares for her. Like, the show, it's the old robot dad thing that has been used before. Not necessarily robot dad, but robot that learns how to learns how to express emotions and actually learns that it has emotions. Like, golems aren't supposed to have those, but the golem, just right from the get-go when we meet him, has already developed parental feelings towards Somali without understanding or being able to appropriately verbalize them. But, there's this case where he wants to learn how to make medicine to heal Somali when she's injured. He doesn't want to see a sad expression on her face anymore because it hurts inside his chest. He has a heart, god damn it! He had a heart all along, John! And he was a good dad! Yeah, that's one of the themes in the show, and I think it realizes that very well. Like, the Golem in itself is a very interesting character, and how they handle him being this surrogate father to Somali. Like, he's not this, when they try to portray these kind of pseudo characters, they try to surrogate dad characters that try to make him super maybe warm in a way and relatable, and there's still kind of this uncanny aura surrounding the Golem. Like, he can be scary when he shows like his hidden eye, like where it's like, okay, this is kind of weird and creepy. And he's also clever, like basically blackmailing like one shady shop owner to give him the proper amount of money for his stones, or he will disclose that the wares sold in the shop are mostly fake, because he can analyze the stones with his eye and everything, with his super robot eye. and it's cool, and you immediately get the feeling like, okay, he's doing this for Somali. Like, golems usually don't leave their forest. That's their mission in life. Like, that's what they're built to do, or created to do. That's what they exist for. And for some reason, this little human spurned him on to take care of something else and, create his own mission in life, that's different from the forest. And yeah, it's just cool. It's just cool to see him learn a lot about parenting. His instincts are in the right place, but his analytical mind often gets in the way of being a more thoughtful father. Like him worrying about Somali's physical well-being sometimes disregards her emotional and psychological needs. And there is a scene later on, or in the middle of the show, which is really heartbreaking, which is kind of relating to his condition and everything, and how he handles that in regards to Somali. And she kind of confronts him or tells him that she wants to be with him forever. And we know that that's not gonna happen. And Golem knows that that's not gonna happen, that eventually they have to part ways because he's gonna stop functioning. And regardless, he promises to her that he will be with her forever. And that scene is truly heartbreaking because he knows damn well that won't happen. But that promise is what Somali kind of needs right now, even if she might hate him for breaking that promise later. And, maybe he will realize that later, maybe he won't. I won't give it away. There is some things that he does right, there are some things that he does wrong, some things he doesn't really understand yet, some things he needs to realize, and someone needs to help him realize with that. And sometimes other characters, like Shizuno and his companion. And that's also a really interesting and cool part of the show. Like, especially when it comes to these two main characters. I really like Golem as a character. He was very interesting. He was very well developed.
I feel like this whole father-daughter relationship thing is something that a lot of writers in Japan are finally starting to plug into. And this is going to sound weird, but I think one of the first big real takes on that, or the first real turn on that, was the original Nier.
Oh, yeah.
Now, here's the weird thing, because Nier, the original version of the game, released in two different versions.
Yeah.
One was a brother-sister story.
That was the Japanese version, right? Or
yeah,
the PS3 version.
That was the
Nier
PS3
Replicant.
version. Yeah, it was called Replicant. And then it was retooled for the Xbox 360 and for the Western release called Nier Gestalt. And Brother Nier became Papa Nier, and the story gained a lot more gravitas because of it. And I feel like after that, there's been a decent number of stories about that kind of relationship that have been coming out, and because there's something about the relationship between a father and his daughter that has a strong emotional anchor to it. There's another show that is airing right now, and I talked about back during the sneak peek, called Kakushigoto, and it's got the same anchor to it. It's got all sorts of goofy stuff going on, but at its core, it's this dad wanting to do good by his daughter. And that's definitely the strong part of the core of this story. Like we said, there's other strong themes to this show as well, but I feel like that is the anchoring point for the story, and we see it
Absolutely.
brought to the forefront often, which is the point.
Yeah.
But it works really well because we see the Golem, in spite of being basically a robot, growing and changing in ways that he doesn't understand. It doesn't understand, and that affects their relationship in meaningful ways.
Yeah, and Western media and games, of course, has done stuff like that too. The example that for me comes immediately to mind is one of my favorite video games of all times, The Last of Us, which also has incredibly well developed surrogate father-daughter relationship that I'm really interested to see the continuation of coming in a few weeks. So this is always, if it's done well, if it's done really well, it's super strong material. And it's relatable even if you don't have a child yourself, even if you are not a dad, even, everyone is a son or a daughter, but not everyone is a dad or a mother. But if the stories are done really well, you can still relate to these characters and what they're going through, So, and I feel like this story also is like, to me, I'm not a dad, so I still could relate to these characters, and I really fell for these characters. So it was definitely well written in that regard, and then there's all the interesting side theme stuff. Of course, there's interesting world building. There's the animation is just like with Mode of Satellite stuff. You don't really have like these mind blowing Sakuga moments. You mean there are some in Symphogear and Macross definitely, but in here this is not the kind of show. It's not a super actiony show. Yes, there is some tense. Heavy moments, but it doesn't really need like the super strong, super lavish animations. It's really solid, and the facial and body gestures are given enough attention to emphasize important emotional moments, which is the core aspect of the show, like the emotions of these characters. And it's kind of tricky with a character like Golem because he doesn't really have any movable facial features or stuff like that. So when in moments where that is brought to the forefront, where he actually has to express emotions, doesn't know how to verbalize it correctly, then the animation shines, where he slowly raises his hands to his chest, for example, and tries to explain to another person what this feeling that he doesn't know what it is when Somali is sad and has a sad expression on her face. And he's like, no, I get you. I understand. And the animation helps with that. So they definitely focused on, in the animation department as well, on the most important aspects. And of course, all the interesting, creative, colorful vistas. Like the colors in this show are fantastic, in my opinion. We seldomly highlight those when we talk about the artwork and stuff like that. But the color palette in the show is just fucking magical. Like you're constantly walking through this incredibly rainbowy wonderland.
Rainbow, pastel-y, sort of.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you also have deserts and everything and more bleak environments, but then you're just suddenly in a fucking cave where there's fucking light everywhere and flying flowers and all that shit. And you're like, holy fuck, who came up with this? It's amazing. So, yeah, even in that department too, they did everything right. And like I said, facial gestures and everything. And when we talk about our main core concept, the father-daughter relationship, the other important aspect of that besides Golem, of course, is Somali. This wouldn't work if she wasn't like the cutest thing on the face of the fucking planet. She's a good kid, definitely, and you quickly understand she loves the Golem with all her heart and definitely sees him as her father. Not only because she calls him dad, but the feelings she is bringing towards him, like expressing towards him, are definitely the feelings of a daughter towards her father. That's the way she cares about him, and it's so understandable. It's so relatable, and like we said, the Golem disguises Somali as a Minotaur child. Kind of like only putting this hood on her with these tacked on horns, so I'm surprised that it worked as long as it did.
I kind of wondered about that on and off, but most of the characters they meet along the way don't really question it. So I was sort of like, all right, okay, and then it gets to a point where they start questioning it, and it's like, oh no.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have to question it because humans are just almost completely extinct in this world. That's alluded to. Like there are no humans villages really left. There's some humans apparently still in slavery, or sold into slavery and sold to be eaten and everything. But there are not any running around. So they, if a Golem walks into the town with a child, they would never assume that to be a human child. So Minotaur child makes more sense. It's like, hey, everyone is treating them, fine. But there are these eerie and tense moments where certain creatures just, get a whiff of Somali's scent and like, hey, this smells delicious for some reason. What is this? And you're like, fuck, Golem, come back! Save your fucking daughter! Yeah.
Yeah, man, this show does well at building tension around
Oh, yeah.
situations like that.
Oh,
Like,
yeah. Yeah, definitely. And, okay, this is a bias. Like, Somali is the typical unrealistic anime kid, as in she's constantly cute. She helps out with chores when they are at Chizuno's place. She never becomes an annoying pest, like certain real children often do. Like, she does behave like a normal child in many ways, though, like constantly running off because something caught her attention. And that's also Golem has to learn to adapt to. In the beginning he doesn't. He's like, what? Oh, she ran off again. What the fuck? There's just this great moment where he's in the shop to get money for stones he's selling and comes out and he's just like this solemn, unemotional again. Because she's gone and just fucking ran after a cat creature or something. And it's great. Yeah. And also a thing, I was wondering, is this a secret crossover with Fatal Fury? Is Somali Terry Bogart's daughter? Because she says, come on a lot. which is stuck out to me. It's like, what?
I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, she's super cute.
I mean, as someone who has a 4-year-old nephew, I can see a lot of the same some of the same sort of behaviors coming out. Like, there are times where you say, I want to help out. It's like, okay, well, you're 4 years old, so you can help out about as much as you can, but sure. Yeah. Like, just today, here's a good example. I was trying to put together a fire pit, and he's like, I want to help. And it's like, well, these are big metal pieces, but you can help me by counting the screws as I put them in, that sort of thing. So yeah, and that's what Somali does as well. She wants to, she sees all the stuff that her dad does, and she wants to be part of that. She wants to imitate him in a way, and she wants to support him and, be an important part of, their family. And she really has the desire to do that. And, some of the characters help her do that. And it really enriches her life and makes her very happy. Being able to give some of the love or something she feels is love back to her dad. And those moments are great. And there's also, like, she and Golem have to learn about simple child struggles, like losing baby teeth. This is also precious. That was so good. Yeah. So, yeah, there's a bunch of cool stuff in there. And it's never cheesy, in my opinion. It's never like, oh, look at this father-daughter thing. Oh, it's so super cute. It's so hard. No, it's also feels, even though this is like this very sprawling fantasy world, and there are so many fantastical creatures, all of this feels really down to earth when it comes to its core relationship between our two main characters. So it helps relatable. It to feel grounded in this weird fantasy life. And another aspect of making it feel grounded is because of the other themes that are on the side of the on the side of the sidelines of this world, like the xenophobia, the racism. Some of that manifests in, some of the characters they meet. Like there's this, and the tragedy behind all of this, like the tragedy behind racism and xenophobia and what that leads to. Like there are these characters, Uzoya and Haitora, and their relationship is kind of a dark mirror of Somali and Golem in a way. Like what they have experienced and what they feel for each other, but how that came to be is like a much darker and harrowing thing than the sweet, soft relationship that blossomed between Somali and Golem. And the conclusion of that story is touching and beautiful as well, though. So the show is at its best when it taps into this kind of underlying sadness, but kind of wraps it up in a kind of not necessarily happy, but bittersweet way. So yeah, I really like that. And again, we got this very, very relatable and very understandable sentence that's often spoken, where it's like, humans are a frail and cowardly species, which is something Horizon says. It definitely speaks the truth there. And there are parts, especially when you learn about the past of certain things, you're like,
the humans brought all of this on themselves. And I cannot feel sorry for them. And then there are other parts where you see kind of the other side of things, and you're like, yeah, sometimes it's just shitty, all around. And again, this is where the themes of forgiveness, the theme of forgiveness comes in certain aspects, and that without that you cannot advance. And it's not like the humans are like the only bad things here. Like the beasts are not immune to the failings of the humans. Like especially in the latter part of the show, you see that some beasts have become just as bad as the humans that were before them, and judge all humans by their race and not by their actual character. And that's an important thing. There are a lot of important things being said in this show, which I did not expect at the beginning. I was just expecting this really cute father, like robot dad and human daughter thing, and seeing some interesting vistas and traveling the country, and then having this really heartwarming, maybe sad ending to all of this. But there's much more to this show than that. And I'm really happy there is. It's like the opposite experience of fucking ID Invaded, where it's like you go into a show, you expect a certain thing, and in the first case you get a lot less out of it, and in this case you get a lot of more out of it. And I prefer the latter. Yeah. Believe it or not.
No way, you don't say.
I know, big surprise. But yeah, I think this show is fucking great.
It was a welcome surprise. I was honestly not sure I'd stick with it, but it had, like, when we were talking about Demon Slayer, I stuck with that because of, the emotional core. That's why I kept with this one. But this show also had other things going on that were really well written and executed and interesting, and contributed to the world building and whatnot. Can you believe that it's possible to do that?
Yeah, it's amazing. And this is not a super fast show. Like, if you were on the lookout for a super fast, like quickly told, plot-driven show, this might not be for you. This has more of, for most of its runtime, more of a like fantasy slice of life feeling to it, with a central core relationship, and some world traveling and everything. But regardless, it's like, okay, this week we meet these people and they tell us something about their lives and everything. And this week we meet these people and so on. And in the very last couple of episodes, there comes a bit more, plot into it in a way. And we learn some background of the world and whatever. But it's still more like, okay, this is all about, on the core level, this is all about Somali and Golem and their relationship. And if you're interested in that, if you like well-developed characters, if you like a very heartfelt, warm, touching story between two characters, this is for you. This is it. This is a really, really tight, neat character story that I wasn't necessarily like fucking on the edge of my seat, but I was happy to return to it with every new episode, where it was like, okay, this might be sad and dark in certain ways, but there's always this underlying sweet, welcoming, comforting feeling in this show because of the interactions between certain characters. And yeah, the thing just from the setup alone that I was thinking of was, this is basically Terminator 2 meets The Jungle Book, and I love it. And I wasn't wrong. So yeah, I think this is a show. If you're interested in this kind of storytelling, this is a show well worth your time. I think you will not be disappointed. I think, John, you felt the same.
Yeah, I mean, in spite of it having a little bit of a more lackadaisical plot progression, I don't ever really feel like it meandered like other shows have that we've talked about. I don't know if you feel the same.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, they stay, sometimes you have like 1 or 2 episodes where they stay in the same place. I mean, Golem takes on some odd jobs, and sometimes he's a waiter, sometimes he's a bodyguard, because they have to make ends meet. But it's like, okay, once they are done with this place and tell the story that was to tell there, they move on, and we see new vista, we meet new people. So even though it's kind of slow and more focused on what these characters, how Somali grows as a child and as a daughter, how Golem grows as an actual person and as a dad, and then we move on. We learn something new about the world. We learn something new about what happened to the humans. Learn something more about the different beast race. So there's always something happening and something new to experience and see.
Yeah.
So again, even though there is not a real tight plot progression or anything, it's still interesting to watch, and there's still always something more to see in the next episode.
Yeah, everything is in service of world building and character development.
Yes, indeed, and it's done very well.
But yeah, I think kind of goes without saying at this point that we both really enjoyed this show because it had a really strong emotional bond between the characters. We had some really colorful environments, and we didn't touch on too many of the supporting characters, but because there's a few others later on that are, decently interesting as well. But yeah, the cast as a whole, you feel like even though they're not around super long, some of them come back, some of them take off. Sometimes they're around, sometimes they're not, that sort of thing. You sort of get a pretty good feeling for not only who Somali and the Golem are, but, the other characters that they meet along the way. So, yeah, we both really enjoyed this show, and I think it's definitely worth watching. It's, 12 episodes. The manga, like I said before, the manga is still going on. So, hey, who knows? Maybe it could come back for a second season. I know I'd watch more of this.
Yeah, definitely.
And if all that sounds good to you, it's in the U.S. anyway. It's streaming on Crunchyroll and Verve. How about is it on Wakanim like other shows are in Germany or?
No, actually, it's on Crunchyroll over here.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. You can check it out on Crunchyroll pretty much wherever, I guess. But definitely a great show that's, got some solid life lessons in it, and it's got, really good emotional anchor.
And that is a wrap on the 94th episode of Anime Brain Freeze. All the music in our show is from the Double Dragon Neon soundtrack by the amazing Jake Kaufman. Please go to vit.bandcamp.com and check out his awesome work. Our show is available on most of the popular podcast services, but it's always worth visiting animebrainfreeze.com for our review index and more. Leave us comments and questions on YouTube, follow us on Twitter at AnyBrainFreeze, or send an email to animebrainfreeze@gmail.com. We would love to read your feedback. Thanks for tuning in, we hope you had a good time, and please join us again on our next episode. Macht's gut!
So long, everybody. Next time on Anime Brain Freeze.
Paranormal investigations! For real this time!
And An Odyssey Across the Stars reveals a decades-old cover-up.
Maybe check those out instead, even if you just wanna kill some time.
I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed.
Talk to my mom. You have a lot in common in that regard.
Oh no.